Dreamcatchers, welcome to the Writer's Haven. I am your host, Helena, and today we're having a discussion with poet and lyricist Hermond Palmer. Hermond released his first book in 2016 entitled Echoes from the Quiet That I Keep, and has a follow-up book due out in 2018 entitled Open Mic, Words to Fill the Light in You. This multi-talented storyteller has written stage plays, screenplays, and musical soundtracks for nationally known jazz artists and internationally known filmmakers. With an MBA from Wharton, Hermond has no problem integrating analytical concentration with creative musings. Join me in welcoming writer and master storyteller, Hermond Palmer. Welcome to the Writer's Haven, Hermond.
Thank you, Helena. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Well, I'm happy to have you in the Haven because you are so incredibly talented in so many ways and in so many writing, genres of writing that I definitely wanted you to come in and talk to our Dreamcatchers today about your different avenues of storytelling.
Yeah, I'm in a love affair with words, and I want to make sure that when I write something, I make sure that it's worthy of people taking the time to read it.
Okay. So you've written screenplays and stage plays and poetry, and so of those different genres of storytelling, which would you say is the most hits your heart in a way that most passion hits an artist's?
It's funny.
Creativity.
They each hit my heart, but for different reasons. Poetry for me is therapeutic. It's my knee-jerk reaction to what I see in life, in the world, on the news. But the screenplays and the stage plays, they allow me to really immerse myself in a situation or a series of situations. And I get to play with my characters. I get to develop them. I get to almost birth them like they're my children. And then sometimes I start a situation and I have no clue as to how it's going to end, but I know it's going to be fun. And it's my opportunity to say, you know what? I enjoy movies, and if I were to do it, it would look like this.
Okay, so and you're saying that is true for the screenplays?
Screenplays and stage plays.
And stage plays, okay, then that was the other
right.
thing I was going to ask you, if there was some connection between the two. So how do you approach that process of either one, screenplay, writing, or stage plays?
It's funny, I'll see a situation, and the whole way I got into screenplay was my aunt and I were talking about storytelling. And she said, let's do a story together. And I quickly realized that when you do a story, you want to own it. And she wanted the story to go one way, and I wanted to go another way. And I'm like, she was hardcore about situations. I'm like, Aunt Beverly, I can't do that. That's too hardcore. So I started doing my own. And that's when I got into it, and I started saying, wow, I really have control. And I can really take this situation to this level, and then that level. And then when I write, I like to take you on a journey, and all of a sudden, you expect me to go left and go right, and then I go right. And you're like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that, but okay, let's see where this takes me.
Okay, so in your process, do you think through the entire plot? Okay, so you're developing as you're writing.
I develop. Sometimes I might start at the end of the whole story. I might hear a line or a line of dialogue might come to my mind. I'm like, I really like that. Now, what situation can I apply it to? And I might have a scene. I said, wow, in my mind's eye, I see it clear as day. Don't know how it's going to fit in that project or another project, but I see it clearly. And I don't want to interrupt the creative process. I save editing for later on. The key thing is to get it out and allow myself to write something, just something. It may be good, it might be bad, but as long as I get it down, I can worry about editing it later.
Okay, so you're vomiting on the page.
Oh, yeah. Totally.
And then you're cleaning up and editing later
Absolutely.
on. So is outlining a part of your process at all?
Not at the beginning, but once I have a series of scenes laid out, then I start saying, okay, now, okay, let's be realistic. How is this going to flow? How is this going to work? And in the first screenplay I ever did, I rearranged it several times until it made sense. It's one thing for it to make sense to me because it's from me, but to have a stranger who wasn't part of the creative process come in and see the flow and have it make sense, and not just make sense, but be entertaining, that's the important part. And so that's when I look to outline, but I have to get something to outline first.
Okay, so the ideas are developing, you see the scenes playing out in your head, you vomit that information out, you piece things together as they organically flow into each other, and then you take a step back and begin the editing process.
Exactly.
And that's with the screenplays and the stage plays.
Correct.
Okay. We're going to get to poetry. I just need to ask you one more question about that. And the reason is because, you know, up to this point, many of our dream catchers have been hearing from novelists, which I know novel writing is, although it's writing, it's a different genre of writing as screenplays and stage plays. And so the process and the approach can be as different as the writer. You know, because we all have our way unique way of entering into that creative process. And so you're not outlining, you're organically developing the story, because it's still a story. It has a beginning, a middle, and the end, and an end. And when do you know you're done?
It's funny. It's when I tell the story, and I might start in my creative process with the end. So then I have to, okay, now that I have the end, now I got to get you through the story.
Back into it.
And back into it so that you can say, okay, this was the journey and now I've reached my destination.
Okay.
And that works that way with poetry for me. And you mentioned being a novelist. I'm trying to grow to be one as well. But I cheat because for me, the action is the dialogue. I love the scenes and the dialogue. And when you're a novelist, you got to worry about setting the background. And I haven't developed there yet. I'm working on it. I've started out with short stories. But when you do a screenplay, that I can, like, the action I can control. Because I can tell you what's happening in the background, but I don't have to dwell on the background.
So generally speaking, what are the themes of your screenplays and stage plays?
It's about friendship.
Okay.
Largely about friendship. It's about finding yourself in a difficult circumstance and then working your way out with the help of your crew, your boys. And loyalty is big with me. Love. So many times amongst African American males, there's a lot of love that doesn't really get portrayed enough for my comfort level. So in my stories, it's all about loyalty and love for your brothers by different mothers and how they can rally around you and help you through difficult circumstances. That's key. And to show us how we really are. And by that I mean, I want to portray us as lawyers, as doctors, as presidents and captains of industry, scientists, stuff that you see a little bit of, but that's my whole universe in terms of this is what we do, this is who we are, this is what we're capable of. And I really write with young people of mine because I want them to see their future selves portrayed in a book, in a poem, in a song, on a screen, on stage. I want to reinforce their potential.
Okay, excellent. And we need more of that and seeing those portrayals in our community. So let's segue into the poetry.
Okay.
And so you've explained your process and the general themes of your screenplays and your stage plays. What about the poetry? How do you engage in your poetry writing?
It's funny, I find that I get a lot of my inspiration from what I hear on the news. And you know, with everything that's going on in the news, you hear a certain subject and it puts my subconscious on slow simmer. And then all of a sudden, a word or a string of words might just come to me. And I constantly travel with little strips of paper, pads and whatnot, and I'll write it down and then I'll save it until I get enough where I think, okay, this piece is now starting to say, write me, put me together. And it drives my wife crazy because she's like, what are you doing with these strips of paper? Why do you have all these pads around? I'm like, that's part of what I do. I also find timing is a lot to do with my creative process.
Meaning experience, where you are in life?
At day, in the time of day.
Okay.
Like a lot of times before I go to bed and I start to decompress and reflect on what I've seen, what I've heard, where I've been, little ideas start tickling at my consciousness. And I say, well, let me put that down. Let me see what that takes me. And there have been times when I said, okay, I'm just going to write 2 lines, 2 pages later, I'm like, okay, I really have something to say. And I didn't even really know it. So it's very therapeutic for me.
Okay, so let's talk about the book that's currently out. And we discussed this early on before the show. We talked about, I called them collections, you called them sections. So let's talk to us a little bit about how you came to create those sections and the poetry in them.
Well, when I write, it's like an iterative process. I go over periods of time. And sometimes I want to write about the Black experience. Sometimes I want to write about love. And so I write them and put them in different files. And then I realize poetry is different than a novel because sometimes you just want a quick hit. And you get it, you look at it, and then you're off. But that quick hit might set the tone for your day. Or you might be working through a situation and you need a pick-me-up. And one poem, one part of a poem, can be that pick-me-up. And so when I organize it in sections, the purpose is I want to make it as easy as possible for you to get what you're looking for. So if you want to hear about the Black experience, go to that section. If you want to hear about love, go to that section. If you want to hear about, being a patriot, a lot of times, in the news, you don't really hear about Black patriotism. But when you think about our experiences and what we've been through, we made significant sacrifices and don't get all the credit. So you can actually look at us as being super patriots. And I want to capture that feeling, what it's like. And so each section allows you to say, I'm feeling like love today. Go to love. You don't have to search through the whole book. Just go to that section. Boom. You want to hear about the African American experience, or there's a section where it's miscellaneous. Things that I thought about before. Okay, now that one is going to be a jumble. You don't know what you're going to get in that section, but it's something that I wanted to get out and include in the book. Okay,
do you have a favorite section?
I love love.
Love, okay.
I love love because, I'm a Motown kid and I love slow jams and Quiet Storm. And so if I can write about love in a compelling way that makes people think, yeah, that's how I felt, or that's how I want to feel, and I think I've done my job. But I also like the African American experience because sometimes that's my therapy. And I want to inspire, like I said before, our young people. And I want them to see themselves, but also know their history.
Right.
In the book, there are a couple poems that I love. There's Black is the Thing. And I take you on a journey of our history. And my hope is that as you read that, you might come across a name like, why did he put that person in the book? And you might do some research on that person. There's another one where I say it's If You Were Black. And so far too often, we don't know what it's like to be an individual of a different culture. And so I give one man's opinion on what that would look like. Like if you were Black, you know how we feel because we've been through X, Y, and Z. The other poem is Colored Negro, Black African American. And that's a whole different perspective of anybody, when you read that, there's some universal imagery where you can say, oh, I get that. No, I understand what he's talking about.
So let's take that particular piece and unpack how you developed it.
Okay. That was a journey for me in terms of how African Americans have referred to themselves through history. We were colored, Negroes, Blacks, and African American. And with each experience, we were treated slightly differently. And so I wanted to capture, okay, so what was that like? What was it like to be referred to as colored? And I unpacked that part. It's like, well, it's like if you did this, what's it like being a Negro? And I set up each section with somebody say, what is it like being colored? Next section, what is it like being a Negro? And then at the end, I asked myself the question, what is it like being?
Yeah, and I was going to ask that question. So as you're writing, are these your own experiences that you're penning out on paper, or is it the experiences of maybe, you know,
Other people,
your family?
I think it's an amalgam of all of it. It's a combination of what I've seen, what I've experienced. You know, I'm a product of the 60s and 70s, but I still remember what my father, grandparents, my uncles, who were far older than me, what they would talk about. I mean, I have a clear line of sight as to what it was for them when they traveled south. What it was for them being in the back of the bus. I remember some of those rides. I remember what it's like in terms of going to North Carolina in particular as a young teenager and having somebody refer to my mother as the N-word. And I was
in your presence.
In my presence. And, you know, you don't disrespect my mom.
Right. And so it was the feelings that came out of that experience that that you wrote. So did you write it immediately? And that's really what I want to get to is your overall process. Because, you know, we've had poets come on the show before. And again, you know, they're just as different as we are different in terms of their approach and their process. Yeah. I mean, we had one poet come on. He said, you know, when he wakes up, the first thing he does is grab his pen and paper. So, and I've heard other people say, you know, they come up out of dreams. Sometimes their dreams inspire, you know, whether it's poetry writing or novel writing. You said you've had that as well? You've had that experience?
There was one time when I was in a dream and I dreamt I was writing a poem. And as I was writing it, I'm like, man, this is slamming. Oh, I can't wait to wake up to write this. This is going to be crazy. And I woke up
and I
grabbed my pen and I'm like,
what was that?
And it was so aggravating. And it bothered me when I got ready for work, when I drove to work. I was talking to a colleague. I'm like, you won't believe what happened to me. And as I was talking to her, all of a sudden, a different poem started coming to mind. I said, I'll be right back. And I wrote it down, and it's one of my favorites.
Okay. And I was going to ask you, so would you mind reading one of your poems for us?
And I'll let you pick. Do you want to?
Let's go to love.
Love.
Since that's your favorite section.
All right. Love.
So let's hear your favorite love poem.
I love unconditional.
Okay.
I love you. I love you beyond conscious thought or primal instinct. Through all human shortcomings, flaws, and imperfections. Despite all mistakes, missteps, misdeeds, and misguided interactions. I love you beyond every hurt and injury ever inflicted upon my heart, my spirit, and my soul. I love you from my darkest nightmares to my brightest dreams, from your past hurts, previous injustices, and utter betrayals. I love you through all anger, all rage, all pain, and all the damage done by other lovers unworthy of the blessing that is you. I love you from simply having sex to making love. I love you beyond my life, beyond every inch of every moment, beyond all space and time. I love you from the start of forever to the end of eternity with every hope, dream, and aspiration I could ever muster. I love you beyond sight and sound. I love you from top to bottom, inside and out. I love you in the corners of every whisper and on the wings of every shout. I love you in his presence, in peace, in grace, and in mercy. I love you in sickness and in health, for rich or for poor, till death do us part and beyond. All that you need to know is all that I am, all that I have, will have, or could ever pray for is totally and unconditionally invested in loving you.
All right. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Of course. So I think it's safe to say that your poetry has a basis. It comes, I mean, you talked about the human experiences that you've had and are very personal to you. And I noticed as you were reading this that a lot of it you had through memory as well.
Sometimes. Some of them I do.
Okay, and so the open mic book that is coming out is that spring 2018?
Yes, spring 2018.
Okay, so is that book pretty much another, it comes from the same genesis of this book? Absolutely. Or is it a different, because I've been told, and I don't know this because I'm not an open mic poet, but there is you know, in regular poetry, there's rhythm always.
Oh, yeah.
But there's a different kind of rhythm that comes with open mic reading. And that's just me being a novice and not really knowing if that's true or not.
I think it's different for different people.
Okay.
For me, I love poetry and I love open mic spoken word because there are no rules. I mean, there are rules, but you don't have to subscribe to them. You can do your thing. And you can experiment with not following the punctuation rules. You can experiment with adding some new ones. But for me, if you can evoke emotion, if you can be genuine and pour it in, when people read it, that comes out. And that helps them to identify with the work and then start saying, you know what, I like this. And as a writer, my responsibility is to make sure that if you've taken the time to pick up my book, if you've taken the time to actually read my work, I owe you a return on that investment, because the opportunity cost of you taking that time and spending that money on something that I did, you could have done that, bought another book, spent your time doing something else. I owe you for that. And I want to make sure that when you're done, you're like, yeah, I'm glad I did that.
Okay, and that's with all of your writing.
Yes.
Probably that
Yes,
feeling,
absolutely.
that you have. So there isn't anything particularly or unique with the open mic book?
Not for me.
Okay. Well, I'm glad I asked the question.
Yeah.
Because from the title, I assumed that. But it's probably something that could go either way.
I think with that one, I focus more on themes of uplifting people.
Okay.
And I throw some curveballs in my poetry too, because there's one section, you know, about getting high. And you come into that just by that title, and you have certain assumptions, and I make sure to just take you on a journey. You're like, wow, I wasn't even expecting that at all.
Okay, so let's segue into your songwriting then. And I've been told, and I don't know if this is gospel or not, but there is a very close connection between poetry writing
For me, that's true.
and songwriting. So talk to us about your songwriting journey.
I grew up on Motown, as I said before, and for me, what I loved about Motown is that it told stories. It told stories of love. It told stories about life, and it was poetic, very poetic in terms of the imagery and the flow. And for me, music, specifically songs, are poems set to music. And what I strive to do is to have my poems tell a story with music as a background to help supplement the journey. And I'm a child of Stevie Wonder, you know, Luther Vandross, Lionel Richie, Marvin Gaye. So there's a standard with their work that, you know, you got to bring your A game. And so, no, I don't think I'm good like that. Let me be real clear. I don't think I'm good like that, but I aspire to be. And I give myself permission to try. And if you aim high and you continue to put your work in, put the effort in, you're going to grow. You know, being an athlete, I'm used to working out. And so working out in everything I do, my relationships, my professional work, and my creative work. So I'm constantly trying to make it better. I'm trying to tell that story.
And that comes through in your storytelling in terms of songwriting.
That's what I
Or storytelling in general.
Storytelling. So, and the way I got into it, Jua Howard was a very talented vocalist. Invited me. He had seen some of my poetry, and he said, look, I'm working on a debut album, and I want you to be a part of the project. And I'm like, you want me? I'm like, what are you talking about? He said, no, I've read your work and you tell great stories. So, you know, I want you on the project. And I said, okay. I said, well, what do you want? He said, I'd love some love songs. And so, okay, he sent me a track. And the music was so intoxicating for me, I wrote the song in 20 minutes. And it's Push Aside the Hurt.
Right.
Now, I wrote the verses. I'm not a great hook writer. He wrote the hook. And he does the vocals. And to hear his voice in my head, that's when the story started coming to me. And it flowed so effortlessly that at 20 minutes later, I'm like, Jua, I don't know what the hook is, but you got a song here if you can get the hook. And he did that. And then he said, look, he liked that so much. He said, you got another one? I'm like, okay, send me the track. That one was called Every Time, and it took a little longer to write. But the cool thing about that was he went to England to do a tour and be interviewed on internet radio. And when they did the intro to his segment, I heard a song. And I'm like, man, I know this song. This is great. I know this. It was Every Time, the song that I had written. And when you hear your work being played, it's a whole new euphoria.
It's a new, totally a new stratosphere that you delve into.
It's a high that like lasts for weeks. And he told me when he came back that the DJ told him, he said, it's a great project. He said, but my wife's favorite song is Every Time. And the scary thing was, I'm listening to a woman whose husband is in the music industry, who's exposed to music all the time. And she's saying that her favorite song is something that I had written a world away. Someone I've never met, who was white, but the themes were so universal that she's like, man, I like this.
That's awesome to be able to take music, because it sounds like he just sent you the music.
That's exactly it.
And then and be able to create something out of that other creative process, because that's a creative process too in writing music. So I really, really applaud all of your creative, all of the things that you've done in your creative journey.
Thank you.
And I know that you've done some work with Monda Webb.
Yes.
Monda was on in our first season, and was at 7:33?
7:33 a.m.
So you did the soundtrack for
the first
her.
book. She had two versions, and the first one, we worked together, and she found out that I was a writer, and she said, look, I'm playing with a novel, and could you read it? I asked her, can I read it? She said, well, I'm not done. It's been 10 years. I'm like, I'd like to read it. And so I read it over the weekend, and I came back on Monday, and I said, well, here it is. And she said, what, you didn't like it? I'm like, first let me apologize. She said, why? It's not good? I said, no, it's really good. And I'm going to stay on you so hard to make sure you finish this, that I'm going to be a pain. And she finished it. And I said, now, the marketing background kicked in. To give you a point of difference, if you were to put different songs or different sounds in an icon and let your readers know, boom, it'll enhance their experience. And she said, well, do you have anything you could do? And that's how all of a sudden I had the soundtrack to her book.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We're going to have to definitely have you back in the Haven. I do not know where the time went, but it's always quick when we're having enlightening discussions with very, very talented people.
Thank you.
Dreamcatchers, I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Haven and was able to connect the pieces in bridging your passion to the fullest. As Hermond has demonstrated, writers write. So don't ever feel limited in what you choose to put pen to paper to. For more information about Hermond or to connect with him, you can hit him up on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter at Hermond Palmer. If you missed any of our phenomenal Season 1 shows or want to catch up on Season 2, you can view them on our YouTube channel and become a subscriber. Join me next week when I sit down for a discussion with Jemiah Nicole, a New York University student who recently released a fictional memoir entitled Woke. You don't want to miss this fascinating story of her writer's journey. I will see you next time in the Haven, and until then, catch fire on purpose.